back for round 2 here. So thank you to everyone who watched the last video I made. I appreciate it, especially people who commented. Whole lot. So gonna do another one here. So the thing we're gonna be talking about today is maybe slightly less personal, hopefully let me get a little more comfortable with doing these videos. So it's about how I got diagnosed with this disorder and why I decided to try to get it to happen, and whether someone else that thinks they have this disorder should bother trying to get diagnosed with it, and how they would go about doing that. So technically, any psychiatrist or psychologist can diagnose this disorder, as far as I am aware. However, it doesn't play out like that in reality. If you go to any website for any of these people, you'll see most of them don't even mention personality disorders. At least in my area, a whole lot of the people that would theoretically diagnose you with a mental health condition pretty much focus on more common stuff like ADHD or autism, and they're not really interested in dealing with personality disorders. It's essentially a specialty. And there's not that many people in my area that really talk about it at all. I found one person in like a 2-hour radius that even mentioned personality disorders on their website. They didn't mention anyone in particular, but you know, that's a start. So I went to that guy, and immediately I really was not a fan of him, and it was clear I was not going to be using him as a long-time psychologist for various reasons, personality-wise. But I did decide, since he offered psych evaluations and he said he could diagnose me with this disorder if it applied, that I would give it a shot. So the thing is, the guy immediately pretty much agreed with me that this disorder is probably what I had, but he wanted to do the psych evaluation anyway. I mean, I guess the testing is more or less required. I feel like the test I went through was a little overkill, but we'll talk about what it was. So I have the evaluation in my hands right here. So basically, it included a clinical interview, behavioral observations. That's a difficult word for some reason. A couple intelligence tests, an anxiety inventory, which is more or less a multiple choice questionnaire, and same thing for depression, blah, blah, blah. More or less, I talked to someone, I did a lot of testing, a lot of which had to do with my intelligence. So we'll get that out of the way first. The intelligence testing is essentially to make sure that you don't have some learning disability that's causing you problems in your life, that's making you super anxious and making you think you have an anxiety disorder when really you're just not getting the help you need to deal with something else. I think it was way overkill for just figuring out whether that was the case. It was a full-scale IQ test and all that. It's like half of this evaluation. It's kind of silly, but anyway, so there was that. And then they interviewed me, this one woman that was doing the test, which was not the same as the psychologist who I scheduled with. Essentially interviewed me asking questions about anxiety, depression, family history as far as mental health and physical health and all that, and some multiple choice questions basically to determine how severe anxiety was in different scenarios, and depression. And of course it did the thing where it's got a bunch of the same questions basically just repeated with slightly different phrasings to make sure you give the same answer or an equivalent answer if it's a different answer. Like, I strongly agree that I am anxious in this scenario. I strongly disagree that I'm comfortable with this scenario. Anyway, so the reason I decided to get this test done was basically I already knew I had this disorder. Obviously, I'm not a doctor. I can't diagnose myself with it, but you kind of know when you know. And the main reason I decided to do it is I hoped it would make my family and other people close to me realize the reality and depth of my problems and be a little more accommodating. I don't know that it was successful in doing that. That is the main reason I decided to do it. Because it doesn't really do anything to get this diagnosis unless you think it's really going to help you to have a name to put to it, because there's no medications or something specifically prescribed for this disorder. And in fact, many of the anxiety medications usually prescribed for like social anxiety disorder probably won't work for people with this, at least in my experience and the experience of other people I've heard about. But it doesn't mean they're not worth trying at all, but they probably won't be the thing for you. And we'll talk more about that at a different time, but we'll go on to the test itself a little bit. So first off, I'm reading the first paragraph of this evaluation, and it's kind of immediately obvious that it was not a great deal. She got some of my basic background information wrong. She decided that I had an older brother when I told her I had an older sister. So it's not a good sign right off the bat, especially considering that this test took like 3 hours and, made me super anxious and was quite expensive. So anyway, the point was to get the diagnosis. So we'll talk about how that went a little bit. So the first thing was the IQ test. We'll more or less skip over that. It's not really relevant. Like I said, the purpose is just to make sure you don't have some learning disability, more or less. So then we got on to the multiple choice questions, and I pretty much already explained how that was. If you've done any random test online to see if you have this disorder or whatever, you might think those are more or less randomly created and not realistic. They're pretty realistic, honestly. They're not the exact questions and the precise phrasings, but if you take one of those random tests, you'll probably understand what this entails. So like I said, they basically just phrase the same questions different ways to make sure you give consistent answers. And just ask about your depression and your anxiety and all that in different scenarios, and obviously in different ways, not just are you anxious while doing this, but anyway. And let's see, so the interview portion, it's also not very surprising. It's just sort of the same questions, except that the person interviewing you can get more specific than multiple choice and try to interpret how you're responding to see if you're being honest and all that sort of thing. I think that's the main point of it. Which brings me to a couple things, a couple pieces of feedback in this. So one thing was that I was reported as appearing disheveled during the interview, which I thought was an interesting observation. I made some small effort to not appear disheveled. I'm not really the type of person that puts a lot of effort into my appearance, but when I had to go do this test, I didn't think I looked disheveled, so it was nice to hear that. Definitely reinforced my anxiety a little bit there. Not sure why it was relevant either, but they also said, I don't know exactly where this quote is, but she also observed that I was in an acute episode of anxiety and depression right now, and so my answers would be exaggerated, and she would scale them back for the purpose of the diagnoses and all that. Which again, I think that's someone maybe not understanding the reality of this disorder. I mean, I guess I do have acute episodes, but they're sort of short-lived. I mostly have a very permanent problem that doesn't change all that much. So I thought that was a little strange, but in spite of that, I did receive a diagnosis of avoidant personality disorder from this, and so the thing they base that off of is this MCMI-4 personality patterns and psychopathology scoring system based on all of these multiple choice questions, largely is where these scores are from. So I received particularly high scores in avoidant, melancholic, and depressive. So that's more or less what you'd expect, and that's why I got that diagnosis. She also mentioned that the scores for dependent and paranoid were notably high, but not high enough for any sort of diagnosis there. And I don't think those things are surprising, especially if you think about the subtype symptoms of this disorder. I'm definitely paranoid, but at the same time, I'm not. I have some general paranoia, just like looking around, wondering if someone's following me, watching me, blah, blah, blah. But it's just sort of because of my anxiety. It's not really because I believe that to be the case. So not particularly surprising. So, that's kind of the whole thing about this test. It was a whole lot of time and money for something that wasn't particularly surprising. And yeah, at the very end of it here, I received some recommendations as to what I should do to improve my condition. The first recommendation was that I receive a thorough medical evaluation to rule out general medical related causes of my symptoms of depression. I think it's pretty obvious if you talk to me, and in that interview it should have been obvious that my depression is based on not being able to enjoy things because I'm super anxious all the time and there aren't that many things that I'm interested in. But nonetheless, that was the recommendation, is that basically I go see a general practitioner to make sure that I'm not somehow sick that's causing my depression. I don't believe I am. but I certainly don't go to a doctor regularly as you might expect with this disorder. The second was therapeutic interventions, which basically means she suggested I receive cognitive behavioral therapy, which I had already done before. I didn't find it useful for reasons I will talk more about in a different video, but I definitely wasn't about to go do it with this guy because I just wasn't a fan of him. The third was group intervention and social engagement, which included the suggestion that I go to a group therapy setting as well as basically just go outside and do stuff. And again, this is sort of the end game for this disorder. If you actually want to do anything about it, this is really gonna be the only way you can. But that doesn't mean it's not still basically impossible, or at least extremely difficult for people with it that are having a really hard time. So it's not exactly a surprise to see that recommendation, but I don't know how useful it is either. The fourth was basically go take some medicine. I have taken at least 5 prescription medications. Again, I'll talk more about those later. 4 of them did nothing. 1 had minor negative side effects and did nothing else. It's my opinion that these medicines can definitely be very useful, and I'm not telling people they shouldn't try them, but I think for people with a personality disorder like this, it's not some sort of temporary or situational issue that medicine can help with. It's just part of who I am. I've tried medicines in spite of that, like I said, for at least a month at a time for each of them. And then we go on. Fifth was sleep hygiene. So I reported not getting very good sleep, and so the suggestion was if I sleep better, I'll be less depressed and less anxious, and that is true to an extent. However, it's go to bed and wake up at the same time. Avoid naps if possible. Do not drink caffeine after noon. All things that I already do, right? It's just a list of 10 things about how to sleep better. It's like, okay, yeah, I mean, I can read an eHow guide as well. I don't know if that's actually going to help me sleep better and if that's somehow going to cure my anxiety. But it is a suggestion on here. The sixth was vocational rehabilitation, which basically I applied to programs in my state where they help you find a job. I think I can get a job. I don't think I am old enough and having not worked for long enough that I would have a problem getting a job. Last time I applied for a job, I was offered it. I just wasn't able to follow through with it because it was extremely stressful for obvious reasons. Obviously, I don't think this program would necessarily help very much. Supposedly, they're supposed to offer specific help. You go to this website, it's very obvious that they're not offering specific help. They more or less give you a list of jobs to apply to that'll hire pretty much anybody. And it's like, okay, probably could have figured that one out myself. The seventh one is adaptive functioning, which apparently just means doing things you like, which that's definitely a good idea. There aren't that many things that I like. That was kind of part of the problem. I'm not able to do that many things, but okay, that's a good suggestion. And the final suggestion was that I should be reevaluated in 1 to 2 years, which, me being cynical, sounds like they would like to charge me again for another IQ test. So I don't mean to sound too negative about this, because it wasn't like the interview was rude or anything. It was fine. And I got the diagnosis, which was my original purpose of going in there. Like I said, I wanted, it wasn't really for me, it was so that maybe other people could understand more what I'm dealing with. And I don't think it really helped. I kind of thought having an official label and a doctor's signature kind of thing would make people be like, damn, yeah, that really does affect him like that. But I think the truth is most people that don't have something like this think they can relate to it because they've been socially anxious before, and everyone has. So I'm not debating that, but it's very hard for people to understand that it's different. And for me, even this didn't really help with that. I think if you have someone that really wants to understand, I think part of the key to understanding this as someone that doesn't have it is understanding that you can't understand, and that's true for any mental health problem. You're never going to fully relate to it. It's not like a physical illness where you could theoretically have the same thing happen and then you could more or less understand. It's just completely different for every person that experiences it. It has similarities where if we have the problem, we can relate to each other, but And that's the other thing. You can certainly develop anxiety, but personality disorders like this are developed pretty early, and it's not like someday that might happen to me. I just gotta I keep at it. I keep interacting with people, and that's what keeps me from getting too anxious. It's totally different. I don't want to ramble too much, but it's really hard to relate to, and what people need to understand is that they just have to kind of accept it for what it is and do whatever they can to that you ask them to make you more comfortable, more or less. That's about it. You can't fully communicate what it is to have something like this, I don't think. So the final part of this, more or less, is should you get a diagnosis and how would you do it? So how would you do it is situational depending on where you live, how difficult it's going to be. I live in a fairly rural area, so it's not surprising that I had some difficulty finding someone who would give it. There's areas where it would definitely be easier. Um, but more or less, you go talk to a psychiatrist or a psychologist. I think it's more likely going to be a psychologist because psychiatrists are usually just trying to prescribe medicine. So the main question here is, should you get a diagnosis if you think you have this? Well, if you're really not sure of what your problem is and this could be it, it's probably worth talking to someone and trying to get a diagnosis. And it's always worth trying to talk to someone anyway. I personally don't think therapy is very useful, but you should absolutely try it and draw your own conclusions. And I'll talk more about why I feel the way about it that I do later. And I think it can be very useful for some people, to be clear, just not me and maybe not other people with this personality disorder. So the question of why you would get this disorder, get this diagnosis for this disorder if you think you have it. Well, if it really helps you to feel like you have a label, you feel like you need a name to put on it, and you feel like you can't do that without basically someone else offering you validation, a doctor saying, yeah, this is really what's going on, then you should get it if you think you are able to. It's worth it if it makes you feel better. And other than that, there's really no reason. Like I said, there's no medications that are specific to this disorder. So the only benefits are to yourself or to the people around you if it'll help someone understand better what's going on. And that's about it. So personally, I probably shouldn't have bothered with it in retrospect, but I tried it for the reasons I said, and it wasn't that big of a deal. It made me anxious while it was happening, and then it was done with, and I had the diagnosis. And it has the benefit of, I can officially say I have it. When I'm talking about it like this, I don't have to say I match the symptoms. I can say, yeah, doctor told me. I don't really think that matters that much because I know what my problems are, and that doctor clearly does not have avoidant personality disorder, and of course he didn't claim that he did. But it's his diagnosis really more official because he read about the symptoms in a textbook. I feel like the vast majority of people, psychologists, probably heard about this in college and then forgot about it more or less. The guy I was talking about definitely knew more about it than that, but at the same time, it wasn't anything really that I hadn't read online. He gave me an excerpt out of one of his textbooks, and it was kind of interesting, a little more specific information about the subtypes that people a long time ago had observed indirectly, not having it themselves. But this is definitely a disorder that doesn't have much research done about it, and I hope that changes. And if there's ever a research project in my area, I will try my best to get over my anxiety and participate in it. But as of right now, there's very little going on with it because not that many people have it, and the people that do have it obviously are not really comfortable seeking treatment or talking about it or anything else. So yeah, that's more or less the deal with how I got diagnosed, why, and why you might do the same or might not. Yeah, I don't know. I don't really know how to end this video, but this may not have been the best video to go with second off. I probably could have told a little bit more about myself first, but I'm trying to get a little more comfortable with making these first and just get another one out there. And hopefully this will still help anyone who's thinking about trying to get diagnosed with it or trying to get help with it. But I'll talk more specifically about getting help with it later. What I've tried and all of that. So yeah, that's pretty much it for now. Hopefully my next video, I feel like getting a little more personal and sharing some of how this disorder has changed over time for me, from my anxiety to basically before I have memories to how it ended up where it is right now, and what I did during those times, and what I what I think could have affected how it developed and what I could do now and all that sort of stuff. But we'll see. So, yeah, uh, I'll see you guys again later.